Hello guys, how are you doing? My name is Rob of Ro2R Review, and welcome back. So anywho, let's bring this over to the Nintendo Switch, the actual topic of the video today. I want to discuss the longevity of the Switch and what we can expect from Nintendo's console. I've talked about it a few times in passing mention when discussing other topics. You guys have probably heard me mention how I've been sort of guessing that we might get a 4 to 5 year lifespan out of the Switch, that maybe it makes sense for Nintendo to support it at the bare minimum 4 years, at the bare maximum 5. I mean, maybe pushing a little bit over 5. The Wii U had 4.5, for example, so 5.5, who knows? I've just been guessing, just based on kind of how I felt and what I expected the industry to do around the Switch in its lifetime, as well as what Sony and Microsoft might be doing and when they need to move forward, and when Nintendo might feel like, hey, we've done what we needed to do with this, we need to move on to the next bigger and better thing. That's kind of been my guess. And, you know, since discussing that a few times, a couple of pieces of information came out even from Nintendo's recent investor meeting, where apparently I can only find a couple of places, and they don't seem the most credible, that state this, but I have read this in a couple of places, to be fair, and some viewers even pointed it out to me. Apparently from this investors meeting last week, Nintendo and Kimishima did even say that they're actually looking at possibly a 7 to 10 year lifespan for the Nintendo Switch. So holy cow, that is far different from my 4 to 5 year guess, and so that gives us suddenly a pretty big window of time that we can guess, or if we want to believe these rumors, or whatever Kimishima and Nintendo are stating right now, maybe that's their plan, but it could change. We've got a pretty big window. Could be as low as 4 years, could be as high as 10 years, and so I kind of wanted to talk about how long should Nintendo support it. So this is obviously a pretty tricky question to answer because we don't really know a lot about what Nintendo is thinking internally. I mean, to be fair, we only have this one kind of quote about 7 to 10 years as a plan. But of course, I mean, for all we know, Nintendo even does plan on it being 7 to 10 years, but that could only be something that they're assuming or hoping they can do. Maybe things change internally, maybe the business evolves around the Switch over the course of the next 3, 4, 5 years, and maybe they realize they might need to change that. Maybe they need to bring it down. Maybe, you know, by 2022, 2021, they might need to have their next console out, whatever that is, whether it's a Switch 2 or another home console. I've discussed that a couple of times on videos as well, what Nintendo might do with the hardware. But as far as when, you never know. They might decide to change it. You know, and I think that it's hard not to consider, like I already alluded to, what their competition is going to do. I feel like the looming presence of brand new, not iterative, but brand new hardware from Sony or Microsoft is obviously going to play possibly a huge factor into what Nintendo might do. When is the next PlayStation going to come, and the next Xbox, if we even get a next Xbox? Because let's be real, no one knows what Microsoft is doing right now. Like I said, I'm not talking about an upgrade like a PS4 Pro or an upgrade like an Xbox One S or One X. I would be talking about the next actual successors to their hardware. And to be fair, there's an argument to be made, and this is one of the things I love about Nintendo, and this is a good argument, is that, hey, Nintendo doesn't necessarily care what the other guys are doing. That's something they've been doing for so many years, pretty much since that Wii era and that motion control era. They started to break themselves away from the pack, and that's been one of their strongest characteristics. It's held them back in a few places, at a few times, the Wii U, but in most other instances, it's been incredibly successful. The Nintendo Wii, the Nintendo DS, the Nintendo Switch. So yeah, Nintendo likes to march to the beat of their own drum, so maybe if we get a PlayStation 5 and an Xbox 2, whatever that could be, does Nintendo have to care, and would they change their business model and start to create new hardware just because the other guys are doing it? I would certainly believe a situation where maybe they wouldn't care and they're like, whatever man, the Switch is still selling, we're just going to keep on doing what we're doing, you know, and we'll go to our next thing when we're good and ready. That is entirely possible. I kind of tend to believe that Nintendo does care a little bit about what the other guys are doing. I don't think that you can run a smart, successful, competent business in this industry without paying attention even a little bit. Because again, I fully acknowledge the defense of Nintendo doesn't always really care or pay attention. They march to the beat of their own drum. I agree with that. That is not wrong. But again, you don't completely shut your eyes off to what Sony and Microsoft are doing. You're not completely blind to the competition in the industry, because where the technology goes has to do with where the whole industry goes, and where the power of the machines and what kind of things they do with their online network, and what the other developers that aren't first party are looking at doing and creating for the whole industry. If Sony and Microsoft make 2 or 3 huge leaps in technology over the Switch and Nintendo does nothing to answer that, it's going to make it that much harder, not impossible, but that much harder to consider other quality ports of multi-platform games ever coming to the Nintendo Switch until Nintendo decides to jump on board. What about those Call of Duty games and those Rockstar games like Red Dead or Grand Theft Auto and everything else from, I know, companies that we hate like EA or Activision, but who make big games that do matter? They might be even less interested in trying to make watered-down, super old ports for the Switch when they've got a brand spanking new PS5 and Xbox 2, and the PCs will just be insanely powerful by this time, 2021 and 2022. Why would they want to take all that extra time and money to make something on the Switch? And sure, again, Switch will have sales and install base, and that will convince them to do some things, but it will still be creating a barrier between what could be possible. So that's why it's like, we can't feel that Nintendo is going to, like I said, completely turn a blind eye to the competition. But of course, there's another side to this coin and another side to this argument, which is what I even just said a second ago, the sales. If the sales for the Switch do not slow down significantly into, 2018, 2019, 2020, 21, and 22, if it's still killing it and still knocking it out of the park, and we've got 70 million Switches, 70 or even 80 million Switches out there in people's homes and hands by 2022, you know what? Yeah, we might have a PS5 and an Xbox 2 out there, and it might be hard for companies to make multi-platform ports for the Switch, but I still think a lot of them will ultimately decide to do it. The Wii is the perfect example because that was so vastly underpowered compared to the 360 and the PS3 at the time, but we saw a lot of weird and wacky and wild attempts to bring some third-party huge games over to the Wii. We saw Star Wars Force Unleashed, we saw Call of Duty, we saw Dead Rising, we saw Dead Space, even though it was a weird like shooter thing, we saw Resident Evil, so many different things, and there's a plethora of others. Eventually, the whole industry still did jump on board, not because the power was there, but because the sales were there. And, a divide started because more and more of those third-party games started not selling on the Wii, and so that kind of created a rift between Nintendo and third parties for a while. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't this great golden era where the sales were so enticing of the Wii that everyone wanted to jump on board. Everyone wanted a piece of that Wii pie, man. We were getting these weird Call of Duty games that were made with like PS2 graphics using motion control on the Wii, and it was crazy. And I actually like a lot of those games, but it was a weird time. But it goes to show the power of sales. And so if we get into a similar situation with the Switch and the PS5 and the Xbox 2 in another 4 or 5 years, and Nintendo does not intend on replacing the Switch at that time, hey, those companies could definitely start to make gains. The other thing that starts to happen, though, is let's step away from the third-party situation for a minute and just talk about Nintendo. The thing about Nintendo, another wonderful thing that I and we all love about them, is they are the ever-present innovator. They're always trying to do something new. They're always working on the next big thing. I mean, hell, if Nintendo Labo doesn't prove that point, then I don't know what does. They're always thinking of the next step. They want to do the next quirky thing, the next gimmicky thing. They want to evolve how the gamer interacts with their hardware and their video games again, just like they did with the Switch. They're already writing ideas on chalkboards somewhere in the Nintendo headquarters about what will come after the Nintendo Switch. And while we have seen evidence of Nintendo letting very old hardware go on for a really long time, Nintendo 3DS, I still feel like at some point, 4, 5, 6 years down the road, no matter what the sales are, Nintendo will need to start thinking about doing the next thing because they're going to want something else out there to kind of shake up and disrupt the industry and the way gamers are playing games and the way they're playing Nintendo games. And now that could be something like another device. It's not impossible that the Switch goes for 7 to 10 years, and sometime around 2020, they release some other weird, dedicated portable machine that's like a 3DS successor. So we've got the Nintendo Switch and this weird 3DS successor going at the same time. And maybe that's how Nintendo gets that creative idea out, so that they can let the Switch go for 7 to 10 years. Sure, that's possible. I would believe that. That's a weird-ass thing that I think Nintendo, this current modern-day Nintendo, would do. But I feel like it's ultimately not what they will do. I think they're going to do some crazy thing that will be the successor to the Switch. It might be an evolved idea of the hybrid handheld. It might be something where they split back off into a traditional handheld and a traditional home console. Anything is possible. They're going to want to do the next thing. And they're probably going to want more hardware for themselves to develop on. We know they can squeeze every last amazing little bit of juice out of their games on their hardware. What they achieve on the Nintendo Wii, the Wii U, the 3DS, and the Switch is insane. They make games on systems that make it seem like the system is more next-gen and more powerful than it truly is. It's incredible. So Nintendo will be able to work that magic after 5 or 6 years of the Nintendo Switch, but you have to think that they would also still be internally motivated to want to do something more. Let's see what we can do with new power. Let's see what we can do with the next crazy controller idea. At some point, they might want to evolve the Joy-Cons. They might want to evolve the hardware of the Switch. They might want to make the screen bigger or smaller. Like I said, they might go back to a traditional home console. Like, you'd have to think that their own internal creativity might also be a motivating factor in not letting the Switch go for 10 years. So there's a lot to consider. There's a lot going on. It's definitely hard to say one way or the other. Obviously, you guys know me. I didn't create this video to tell you what I think we're going to get. That's not how I roll. Let's dissect it, man. Let's break it down. Let's talk about the possibilities. Why does 4 years make sense? Why does 10 years make sense? What could convince them to do this, but what could convince them to do the other thing? And I think it's all over the place. You know, I'm gonna stick. I guess I'll adjust my guess from 4 to 5 years to 5 to 6. That's what I'm gonna just state randomly. Like, I mean, I'm obviously not putting all my chips on it. I don't like to put my reputation on getting predictions and guesses and stuff right. That's not really for me. It's fun to do, but I don't really care that much. So I'll just go with 5 to 6 years. As of the recording of this video, the time you guys watch it, that's Rob's guess, 5 to 6 years. Now, before I truly end this video, I should touch on one last thing that could be a huge factor into what Nintendo does with the Nintendo Switch line of consoles. And of course, that would be an upgrade. Do we get an upgraded Nintendo Switch? Like, could sort of make sense. Are we going to get a Nintendo Switch Mini? Like, also could make sense. Are they going to do something to change up and evolve the Switch as we know it, but still make it basically the same thing, the same piece of hardware with some minor adjustments and tweaks, so that they can sort of elongate the life of the Switch? Whereas maybe this version of the Switch, the $299 launch day version of the Switch that we all have, maybe that only does truly have about 4 good years in it before Nintendo should look at start moving on. But what if after 4 years, that's when we get a Switch Mini, or just a more powerful upgraded Switch that's bigger, has a different screen? Maybe the Joy-Cons get better. Maybe it's just the slightest bit more powerful, like what the new 3DS was for the 3DS, or even more so. What if it's an upgrade the way the S or the Pro are for those consoles? If Nintendo does something like that and we're still in the Nintendo Switch family, that's a different story, and certainly they might be able to get another 3 or 4 or 5 years out of it from the day that the upgrade releases, or the Nintendo Switch Mini, or whatever they tried to do there. So yet another humongous factor coming out of left field that could absolutely change what happens here with Nintendo and how long the Switch hangs around. And you know what? I'm kind of good with all of it. If we're only expecting 4 or 5 years out of the Switch, I think that would be fine. I believe that the next thing Nintendo would be bringing us would be great and exciting, just like it always is. If we get 7 to 10 years somehow of the same Switch, I mean, hey, I love the Switch, and so I'm totally cool with that. I hope it doesn't hinder game design down the road, but I still love the console, so I'd be totally cool with 7 to 10 years. Although, think about that, guys. That seems like a long time to be playing on the same Nintendo console, right? So, I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. And then, of course, the upgrade or the Mini. You know, it's a smart business model. It's worked for Sony and Microsoft. It's worked for Nintendo in the past, too, to be fair. So nothing is off the table. Any of these things could happen. So, yeah, I think I'm just going to end this here, you know. Thanks, of course, for tuning in, as always, guys. I really appreciate your viewership and your fanship. I do want to hear what you have to say about this, because it's interesting. Who knows what we can expect? What do you guys think Nintendo might do with the Switch and the longevity of its life? Do any of these options make sense? Do you think we're going to get 4 or 5 years? Do you think we're going to get up to 10 years? Do you think we're going to get an upgrade at some point? I expect most people are going to probably side with the upgrade idea, because I think most people just believe that. And like I said, I mean, it's totally possible. I don't not believe it. I think anything could happen. So yeah, pretty weird, you know? What do you guys think? Please, of course, discuss the Nintendo Switch and its life cycle below. That's going to be it for me today, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is Rob of Ro2R Review, and I will catch you next time on another video.